Happy time zone. It's me, Ivory, and I'm so happy to see your cute face here smiling at me while I'm smiling back at you. Today, I'm really excited to give you a mod review of the ellesimsworld's Plumbob Podcast Mod. If you ever wanted your sim to make money for oversharing their thoughts and opinions via voice and or video content, you're going to be running to download this mod. I do want to advise that this is a mini mod. Also, to get started using this mod, you want to visit ellesimsworld's Patreon, extract the files from the download, and then put them into your mods folder. There are so many tutorials on how to get mods into your Sims game, so it should be fairly simple to get that set up. I have my sim self here, Ivory Snow, and she's currently drafting up some notes for her pilot episode of Woohoo in the City, the podcast, which is based around my sim self live stream that I've been doing lately. And together we will walk through how to set up your podcast and the different ways that you can host one, as well as enjoy a little bit of podcast gameplay together. And in order to make sure that you can successfully use this mod, you're going to need the Get Famous pack, as well as the XML injector. And I'll put the link to that in the description box. All right, so it's a rainy day. It's 5 p.m, and I feel like now is the perfect time for Ivory to get her podcast going. So the first thing we're going to do is register her podcast. And we're going to choose a subscription. Now, if you read through the notes on the mod, it specifies that there's really no difference between the basic Plumbob subscription, which is 20 simoleons, or the premium Plumbob subscription. Oh, that was a tongue twister, which is 50 simoleons. Because Ivory just is delusional and she knows that this podcast is going to take off, we're going to get the bigger subscription. Why? Because in her mind, the 50 simoleons means that it's going to be better. That's right. So let's go ahead and get that registered. Once your sim is done registering their podcast, you're going to get this pop-up that says, "Welcome to Plumpod." Hi, Ivory. Thank you for registering your podcast with Plumpod. Our team is excited to have you on board. We have helped countless sims like yourself become renowned podcasters. As a value member, please note that Plumpod pays its creators $100 for every podcast episode uploaded to our platform. We wish you the best on your podcasting journey. Now that we've done that, we're going to go back to the podcasting menu through the computer, and then we're going to choose the type of podcast. So Ivory has a Woohoo in the City podcast, which is all about woohoo. So the different options that you can choose are movie podcaster, literary podcaster, lifestyle podcaster, health and wellness, food and cooking, finance, conspiracy theorists, beauty, true crime, tech, relationship, and paranormal. So I feel like for Ivory's Woohoo in the City podcast, the most relevant one would be relationship podcaster. All right, so Ivory's all done. She went ahead and registered. So right now I'm going to have her go back into the podcast menu. And now that we've done that, we have the option to have these podcast interactions. So we can do research, we can edit an episode, we can host a podcast. So once you have your podcast type specified, it's going to give you a new trait, which I think is so cute. So Ivory now has a trait for being a relationship podcaster. It says this sim is a relationship podcaster. They explore the complexities of love, friendship, and everything in between, offering advice and insights on building meaningful connections. Their thoughts, discussions, and relatable stories resonate with sims seeking to navigate the ups and downs of relationships. So that's the reward trait that you'll get with that. So now we can go ahead back to the computer and we can pull up the other options now that we have our podcast both registered and we chose the type of podcast. You can go to the interactions, and there's so many different things you can do, which is really amazing for this to be a mini mod. So you can research on podcast material, and we'll have Ivory get to doing that while she's just sitting here idle with nothing to do. And if we pull back up the podcast interactions, you can also edit an episode, host a podcast, network with influencers, promote your podcast, respond to comments, upload an episode, and write material for an upcoming podcast episode. So hosting the podcast is going to be how, your sim creates the episode. Now, the three ways that you can do this podcast is you can use your computer like Ivory, or you can use the camera and tripod if you have the Mochanova stuff pack. I do not have it, so I won't be able to show you that. And then you can also do the stationary camera, and that comes with the Get Famous expansion pack. Now, one of the good things about hosting a podcast from the computer is Ivory literally can go sit anywhere and host her podcast. And now she's going to go ahead and host her podcast from here. And as you can see, she's just over here sitting in the chair talking into her webcam, and she's hosting it from her chair in there. We can even stop this interaction. If I want to have her do her podcast from outside in the rain, we could sit here on the lounge chair and Ivory will still be able to get that podcast in. I hope she doesn't get sick because like I said, it is raining, but we gotta show the people how to use the mod, Ivory. So you gotta be a trooper. All right, she's sitting on the lounge chair. So again, I'm just gonna go back to the computer and I'm gonna hit host the podcast. And this is actually a really good thing because if you, like me, don't have the Mochanova stuff, if you just don't feel like using the camera and having your sim stand, you can just have a nice setup. You can even do a full movie set for a podcast or something, like whatever, go all the way out if you want to. And you could just have your sim go anywhere and host that podcast. And again, podcast interactions, and I'm hosting the podcast from the lounge chair, which is really cool. Personally, I don't know if I would listen to this episode of Ivory's podcast. I mean, she's in the rain, so I'm sure the audio is pretty bad, but it's fine because it seems like her team is like, girl, this is good. You have an opportunity. So we are going to do a little bit of traveling so Ivory can do a very nice, luxurious podcast. So we're going to go travel to a lot called Lilo. It was built by Anna Sims as a restaurant. I use it as a lounge in my game. And we're going to just, have another podcast episode and invite a guest because you can also have a guest with this mod. So I noticed that Ivory is feeling a little bit tense from after recording her podcast or from hosting her podcast. It says the last podcast session was rough. The sound levels were all over the place and every little noise felt like a disaster waiting to happen. Oh my goodness, poor thing. Well, I mean, now she has to edit it. So I'm going to have her come here and edit the podcast because you don't want to just upload a raw podcast, right? Like you want to make sure that it's fully edited, tailored so that your audience, can easily digest it. Her little grumpy face while she's editing this video is cracking me up. It kind of reminds me of when I first started doing YouTube and everything was just terrible. So let's see what happens when she's done editing. Hopefully it was a pretty good editing session for her. Like, Ivory, girl, take a deep breath. It's okay. It is okay, girl. You don't have to be stressed out. This is supposed to be fun. All right, so Ivory is all done editing her podcast and she's still not in a good mood because, I feel like she had high expectations on what it would be like to record, but it's the pilot episode. It's your first episode. It's okay. So now we can go into the podcast interactions and we can go ahead and upload it. I'm a little bit nervous for her. Hopefully people like it. I think she's also nervous. She's like, oh, what if people make fun of me? What if people don't like it? But I just feel like when it comes to things like this, Ivory, you just got to put it out there, mama. And if people like it, they like it. If they hate it, oh, well, we don't care about them. So just go ahead and push out your podcast and then we'll see what happens once she gets her episode uploaded. All right, so she uploaded her podcast and she's feeling fine now. Her emotions went away when she was hosting it. You know how she felt after that. So now after we uploaded it, you're only allowed to upload one a day and we can try again tomorrow. But we can also come through here and respond to an audience's comment. We can also have her come in here and just go back into the podcast interactions, and we can promote the podcast, because I feel like when you're just getting started, you need to do all the self promo. So I also like the fact that you can come through here and you can interact with like celebrities, like network with influencers. I feel like if influencers are talking about your podcast, that's just like 10 out of 10 advertisement. So we'll have Ivory do that as well. And maybe one day she can have one of them on there as a guest. And for the next part of this, we're going to go on location to film her next podcast episode, so we can test out using the camera to host the podcast. Ivory's last podcast episode did fairly well because now she got flown out by her talent agency to do another pilot episode of a fancier podcast over here at the Lilo Lounge. So you can also invite people to podcast with you. So we're here that way Ivory can interview people about their woohoo life, and we can invite them as guests on the podcast. And you can do this with the camcorder, but you cannot do this with the computer, according to the mod notes. So I'm gonna have Ivory come over here and start giving people interviews, right? And she even brought some guests of her own, which are also her friends, and we're just gonna, ask them some questions about woohoo and start another podcast. So let's keep our fingers crossed. Hopefully this one goes well. So I'm gonna click on this camcorder and I'm gonna do host podcast, but you also have the option to host a podcast together. So I'm gonna do that option, and now everyone is going to be podcasting. She seems like she has a lot to say about woohoo life, So we can also go ahead and click the Sims. And with that, you can go to podcast interactions and you can do guest interactions. And we can throw shade at, a co-host if we want to. We can criticize their podcast style. We can discuss personal project, offer them advice. Sir, you weren't invited to the podcast. I'm sorry. So you can also do these host interactions. You can request advice, probe them, mock them, expose them, banter. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask a controversial question. And then I'm just going to do some different interactions for the different Sims over here. Let me go ask her. Let's see. Host interaction. We're going to banter with her. Oh, I don't think she's happy that we're having this podcast here. She's like, excuse me, I came here to have a good time. What are y'all doing? Ma'am, we're hosting a podcast. Please and thank you. So apparently this podcast went pretty well. Podcast perfection. Everything just clicked. This episode flowed smoothly and Ivory's voice was on point. This could be the start of something amazing. So I kind of want to try something out, not hosting together, but just hosting one-on-one. So we're going to host a podcast. And excuse me, I'm just going to sit here. I'm sorry, can we just get into how dope of a Black podcast this would be with just a group of people discussing relationships and woohoo? That is an amazing concept. Ivory, your mind is so powerful. We're going to go to host interactions because Ivory is a host. And we're going to debate some hot topics with Claire. Oh, it seems like some of the topics on the podcast are getting people riled up. Oh, Ivory changed out of her nice dress. Okay. I guess she just wants to blend in, with the rest of the people on the podcast. So she's still bantering. And it looks like we are down another episode. I think we're done recording. We got another moodlet. So we got confident. It's getting hot in here. Ooh, those topics were pretty hot. Such spicy and sizzling discussions is just what Ivory's podcast needed. I'm going to guess that whatever hot topics Ivory asked everyone, she probably went a little bit too far, but that's fine because she feels so much more confident. Even though she doesn't look confident, she feels so great after doing that podcast episode. And what do you guys think she was asking the people? Let me know in the comment section. Other than that, I hope you do try out this mod. I really don't do too many mod reviews, but I'm really happy with this one. So I wanted to share it with you all. Other than that, I want to say thank you so much for watching. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe if you have not done so already with the notification bell because YouTube does not let you know when I upload. Be sure to be kind to yourself and always stay hydrated, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye everyone.